Some people think an empath is weak because they forgive too much. They stay after the disrespect. They stay after the lies. They stay after being ignored, manipulated, emotionally drained, and emotionally abandoned. They give second chances, third chances, sometimes even 100 chances, because they do not see people the way the world sees them. An empath sees pain behind behavior. They see trauma behind anger. They see fear behind arrogance. And because of that, they keep loving long after. Logic says they should walk away. But there is one thing people never understand about empaths. They are not endlessly patient because they are weak. They are endlessly patient because they believe people can heal. And the moment you destroy that belief, something inside them changes forever. Because an empath can survive betrayal. They can survive disappointment. They can even survive heartbreak. But what destroys them is realizing the person they fought for never cared about their heart in the first place. That realization cuts deeper than abandonment. It is the death of emotional safety. And once that dies, the empath you once knew begins to disappear right in front of your eyes. Quietly, slowly, permanently. The dangerous thing about an empath is not their anger. It is their silence after they finally stop believing in you. Because before that silence comes, they tried everything. They explained themselves calmly. They forgave things they should never have forgiven. They stayed. It's awake at night trying to understand your pain while ignoring their own. They carried conversations alone. They fixed problems they did not create. They absorbed emotional damage like a sponge because they thought love meant endurance. But there comes a moment when the empath finally realizes something terrifying. They realize they are bleeding for people who would never even scratch themselves for them. And once that awareness enters their mind, the emotional connection begins to collapse. Most people never notice the exact moment an empath emotionally detaches because empaths do not explode immediately. They fade. First, they stop over-explaining. Then they stop chasing. Then they stop trying to repair every conflict. Then one day, the person who once gave you endless emotional energy suddenly becomes emotionally unreachable. Not because they stopped loving deeply, but because loving you became self-destruction. People mistake the empath's kindness for permission. Permission to disrespect them. Permission to take advantage of them. Permission to lie repeatedly and still be forgiven. But what they fail to understand is that every empath has an invisible emotional line. And once you destroy the one thing that matters most, trust in their emotional safety, there is no returning to who they used to be. Because empaths do not leave after one mistake. They leave after realizing the pattern was intentional. They leave when they understand their empathy became your weapon. And that realization changes them permanently. Suddenly, the empath who once answered instantly now takes hours. The empath who once comforted everyone now chooses silence. The empath who once fought to save relationships now watches people walk away without stopping them. Not because they stopped caring, but because they finally learned the cost of caring too much. And the truth is, empaths often suffer in silence for years before anyone notices. They become emotional homes for broken people. They become therapists for friends who never ask if they are okay. They become safe places for lovers who only come close when they need healing. But who heals the empath? Who listens to the person constantly listening to everyone else? Most empaths secretly carry emotional exhaustion so deep that even they cannot explain it. Because the world praises their compassion while slowly draining their soul. And eventually something inside them snaps. Not loudly. Not dramatically. But internally. The empath finally understands that unconditional love without boundaries becomes self-betrayal. That is the awakening most people never see coming. Because when an empath reaches their breaking point, they do not seek revenge. They seek peace. And peace often requires distance from the very people they once loved most. The terrifying part is that once an empath emotionally disconnects, they rarely come back the same. You may still see their face. You may still hear their voice. But the emotional access you once had is gone. Forever. Because the deepest wound an empath can experience is not being hated. It is being emotionally used by someone they genuinely trusted. That betrayal rewires them. It teaches them to stop overgiving. It teaches them to stop rescuing people who enjoy watching them drown. And suddenly the empath begins transforming into someone colder, quieter, more guarded. Not because they lost their heart, but because too many people treated their heart like a weakness. Instead of a gift, the world often romanticizes empathy without understanding its darkness. People love empathetic souls until those souls finally stop tolerating pain. Then suddenly the empath is called distant, selfish, cold, dramatic, changed. But nobody talks about what changed them. Nobody talks about the nights they cried in silence while still protecting everyone else's feelings. Nobody talks about the emotional manipulation they tolerated because they believed love could heal people. Nobody talks about how many times they abandoned themselves trying to avoid abandoning others. Until eventually the empath reaches a terrifying realization. They realize they have been teaching people how to treat them through what they continue to tolerate. And once that realization becomes clear, the transformation begins. The empath stops shrinking themselves to make others comfortable. They stop begging for bare minimum effort. They stop explaining wounds to people committed to, misunderstanding them. They stop chasing emotional closure from emotionally unavailable people. And that is when people panic, because the same empath they thought would stay forever suddenly becomes impossible to reach. Not because the empath stopped loving, but because they finally started loving themselves too. There is a reason emotionally toxic people are often drawn to empaths. Empaths naturally search for the good in people, even when the evidence says otherwise. Toxic people survive through emotional access. They need someone who will keep understanding them no matter how much damage they cause. And empaths become the perfect target because they confuse potential with reality. They fall in love with who someone could become instead of accepting who they repeatedly show themselves to be. That is why the empath stays longer than they should. They keep waiting for the apology, waiting for the change, waiting for the version of the person they imagined in the beginning. But eventually reality crushes fantasy. Eventually the empath realizes they cannot heal someone committed to remaining harmful. And that moment becomes the emotional death of the relationship. Because once an empath accepts the truth, their entire energy changes. They no longer react emotionally to manipulation. They no longer beg to be valued. They no longer chase connection where respect no longer exists. Instead, they disappear emotionally first and physically second. And by the time most people realize the empath is truly gone, it is already too late. The hardest truth about empaths is this: they usually loved you more than they loved themselves. That is why their withdrawal feels so shocking. You were never supposed to lose someone willing to forgive almost everything. But forgiveness is not infinite when trust is repeatedly destroyed. Eventually, the empath realizes that loyalty without reciprocity becomes emotional slavery. And once they understand that, they begin reclaiming themselves piece by piece. They start protecting their peace instead of protecting everyone else's comfort. They start listening to actions instead of empty words. They start recognizing manipulation disguised as vulnerability. And for the first time in their life, they stop feeling guilty for walking away from what hurts them. That is when the empath becomes truly powerful, not when they endlessly endure pain, but when they finally understand they deserve peace too. The world will call this change coldness because the world benefited from the empath's self-sacrifice. But healthy empathy was never meant to mean self-destruction. True empathy includes boundaries. True compassion includes self-respect. And once an empath learns that lesson, they become almost unstoppable. Because now their kindness is no longer naive. Their love is no longer desperate. Their forgiveness is no longer unlimited. They still care deeply, but they no longer hand their soul to people who repeatedly break it. And that is the moment toxic people lose control over them forever. The most dangerous version of an empath is not the broken empath. It is the healed empath. Because the healed empath can still love deeply without abandoning themselves. They can still understand pain without excusing abuse. They can still care without sacrificing their identity. And once they reach that level of emotional awareness, they stop attracting chaos the same way. They stop trying to earn love through suffering. They stop proving their worth through endurance. They finally understand that real love does not require constant emotional bleeding. Real love feels safe, honest, mutual, peaceful. But many people only realize the value of an empath after losing them. They notice the silence where emotional warmth once existed. They notice the absence of someone who truly listened. They notice the emptiness left behind by a person who once carried the emotional weight of everyone around them. But by then, empath has already changed. Because pain transformed them, betrayal educated them, emotional exhaustion awakened them, and now they understand something they never understood before. Not everyone deserves unlimited access to their heart. Some people are only meant to experience the version of the empath that still believed in them. Once that belief dies, the connection dies with it. And that is why destroying an empath's trust is the one mistake many people never recover from. Because once an empath stops seeing emotional safety in you, they do not just leave physically. They leave spiritually, emotionally, energetically, completely. And no amount of regret can bring back the version of them that once loved you without limits.